Look for the perfect weekend getaway? Love Lansing like a local. And we promise, you'll love Lansing just as much as we do.
You're watching My Michigan TV.
It's time for Lehto Live. Join author, historian, radio host, and YouTube sensation Steve Lehto as he breaks down Michigan's top stories, talks with business leaders and professional experts, and checks out the variety of statewide festivals and events that Michigan has to offer. You're watching Lehto Live on My Michigan TV.
And welcome to My Michigan Television. I'm Steve Lehto. It's a Tuesday. I was not here yesterday, and as you might recall, I am an attorney, and occasionally I have to go to court. I had a court appearance yesterday I couldn't get out of, so I wound up going to court instead, so I apologize, but I'm back today. So, it's not a bad day outside. It's a little chilly, 23 degrees. It's supposed to hit a high of 35, but it's going to get warmer tomorrow, the next day. So Wednesday, sunny, 46 degrees. I'll take that all week long. But, no, rain on Thursday and 46 on Friday with more rain. But that's not bad. I've seen much worse things in our forecast the last few months or so. So, what are you going to do? It's Michigan. So here's the cool thing. I love the Great Lakes, and in fact, I'm wearing a shirt today, although it celebrates Sault Ste. Marie, okay? It has the entire state of Michigan on it. And Michigan, of course, is bordered by 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. And so Michigan has kind of a claim and often does call itself the Great Lakes state. People in Michigan, I think, are more aware of and more in love with the Great Lakes than people in other states, and I'll take that to my grave. I know that people in Ohio, for instance, might like their Lake Erie, okay, but yeah, it's just one, okay? So in Michigan, you gotta love the Great Lakes. And here's the thing. There's a project called Stand Up for Great Lakes. And there are 3 guys in an attempt to draw more awareness to the Great Lakes and the current situation with the Great Lakes, have vowed to go out and using stand-up paddleboards to paddle across each of the Great Lakes. Now, you might say, Steve, that sounds like a lot of work. Oh, it is. But here's the thing. They've already done 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, and they only have 1 left. So joining me right now is a friend of the show, Corey Adkins, and also Jeff Guy from the project Stand Up for Great Lakes. How are you guys doing today, my friends?
Doing great.
Great.
It's an awesome day to be in Michigan.
There we go. There we go. I'm sorry. We missed what you were saying there. Can you repeat that, please?
Oh, I said it's an awesome day to be in the best Great Lakes state there is, Michigan. So for this one, these fellas, we got to travel out of country and do the last one. But I just want to make sure everybody knows I'm not a paddler. I'm just the guy who documents the paddlers. So Jeff is one of the three of the crazy people.
Right. So Corey, and I've talked to you before because you're at the museum up there, and you're just helping these guys with documenting the trip and so on. But the three who are involved are Jeff Guy, who's the other gentleman who's joining us today, along with Joe Lawrence and Quinn Morris. Jeff, can you tell me where it was that you were when you thought of the idea, gee, I should paddleboard across each of the Great Lakes?
I can't, but it was just thinking about doing Lake Michigan. But so we were at a Christmas party. I think it was like 2014, 2013. And Quinn and I were friends at the time. We were talking about paddling across Lake Michigan. And that was the first time I ever met Joe. Joe comes up and says, "Oh, I think we could easily do it." And I said, "Well, have you paddleboarded a lot? Or, you know, what's your experience?" He goes, "No, I've never paddleboarded before, but I think we can do it." So that was when the Lake Michigan idea hatched.
So was Lake Michigan the first of the Great Lakes that you guys paddleboarded across?
It was. Yep. So that was that first year we were trying to get our ducks in a row, find safety boats, things like that, and didn't happen. So we ended up waiting a year, and that next June we crossed Lake Michigan from Algoma, Wisconsin, and we ended in Frankfurt.
Okay. And now I understand that you guys aren't necessarily crossing at the widest point of each lake, because I assume that would be pretty difficult to do. But how many miles across was it when you guys did Lake Michigan?
Yeah, Lake Michigan was about 60 miles. And so it took us 24 hours. And we had so it was late June, but we had really cold water in the middle of the lake. So imagine you're in 800 feet of water. It's pitch dark at night, and the water was like 38 degrees. So we were quite cold on that one. Some of the other ones, the longest one we did was Lake Huron. That was 90 miles. That took us about 28, 29 hours. But typically we pick the route just kind of based on logistically, where can we find safety boats? And then sometimes there's a significant event. So for instance, Lake Superior, we were able to make the Edmund Fitzgerald part of that one.
And you guys, I know at one end of that trip was near Lake, on Lake Superior was near Whitefish Point, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's where we ended. Yep. So, and Corey can probably talk more about why we chose to do that route and end at Whitefish Point.
Yeah, I didn't join the group until Lake Huron. I did not do Michigan with them. But after Huron, I was like, I'm in. These guys, this is an awesome group to be a part of. And for Superior, we started up north of Sioux, Ontario, about, I don't know, an hour and a half north of Sioux, Ontario, at a place called the Pictographs. And there's old ancient pictographs there. And we started at that place so we could pay respect to Lake Superior as they were paddling. So their first half hour, they're paddling along these old, where there's just these pictographs into the stone. They're thousands of years old. And then we went, I don't know, 40 miles over the Edmund Fitzgerald. which we got a permit from the Canadian Ministry to do, which they don't just hand those out left and right. But we got that permit to go over the Fitzgerald and do a very special ceremony. And there they are, right there. They laid that wreath there. There was not a dry eye. There was probably 11 of us on that expedition, and there was not a dry eye in the house when they lowered that wreath into the water. Other than the sun's going down right there, and it was just it was a very, very special, unique event. And one of the weird things about Superior, and I know Jeff, you'll agree with me here, is Lake Superior was amazingly and surprisingly calm that day. It was almost like it's almost like it laid down and just was there for the guys. Didn't cause many issues.
Wow. Well, just to be clear here, people who want to know more about this project, go to standupforgreatlakes.com. We've put the URL up on the website. And you guys are raising awareness, but also raising money. I guess you've already raised more than $80,000. And a lot of this is going to help with the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research. And I can tell you, I've had a canoe on Lake Superior, and I've also had my canoe out on Lake Huron. And anything that gets more than like a foot or two wave height scares me because I'm worried my canoe is going to swamp. But if you're on a paddleboard, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't your feet about this far from the water? And aren't you pretty much just one bad balance away from going into the water at any given time?
Yes. And in fact, on 2 of the trips, I have made my way into the water. But the nice thing about a paddleboard, Steve, assuming you have a leash on, you can just climb right back on it. You know, if you're in a canoe or a kayak, you know, it's a little bit tougher to get back in and you're full of water, but a paddleboard, you just kind of hop back on.
Now, I have a brother who does a lot of long distance running, for instance, and he'll run a race where you actually run through the night into the next day. And he tells me these stories about things you do to keep yourself awake and how do you keep yourself mentally sharp. But I mean, if you guys are standing on paddle boards in the dark at night after having been up all day, I mean, I know you've got like support boats chasing after you and so on, but still, it's got to be a fairly dangerous activity, isn't it?
So I think safety is our number one priority. We have LED lights on our boards, and we have to stay within a certain range of the safety boats. So like if we start to stray away from the safety boats, we get yelled at. So that, I guess, yes, it can be dangerous, but we take the safety part very seriously.
And now we have some footage we've been showing while we've been talking about some of the conditions that you guys have been in. But correct me if I'm wrong. I thought I read someplace that at one point, you guys were being hit by hail and freezing rain. And so some of these conditions sound pretty bad. Was there ever any opportunities where you said, you know something, we can't make this? Or are you guys pretty certain you can deal with all of that stuff?
Well, I think the footage you're showing was Lake Huron, and that one had some times that were pretty rough. We had a lot of rain and some hail. Ideally, we try to pick a good weather window. So we usually give ourselves like a 7-day window and try to pick favorable weather within that. But as you know, the Great Lakes are not super predictable. So I think on 3 of the 4 lakes, we've had conditions that were totally unexpected. The one exception was, amazingly, was Lake Superior. It was beautiful the whole time. So, yeah.
I've had my canoe out in Lake Superior, and I launched it near Eagle River. And I went down shore a couple miles, and it was glassy smooth. I turned around about an hour later, started heading back, and all of a sudden the wind picked up. It got choppy. And within 2 hours, from glassy smooth to pretty big waves. And so it can change on you in an instant on the Great Lakes, but especially on Lake Superior.
Oh, definitely. And that's why we were shocked that we were just blessed on Lake Superior. But on the other lakes, I mean, we saw everything you can imagine. We had a headwind a couple times, crosswinds, 3 to 4 foot waves at times. So I think we've, I hope we don't see that on Ontario, but we're I guess preparing for that.
Yeah, there was a section of Lake Erie that they were actually getting blown backwards. So we were losing more ground than we were gaining in an hour. So that was interesting to watch them, because that Erie trip was hot. It was so muggy and hot, and it was interesting to watch these guys battle through what they did on that lake.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break right here, and we'll be back more to talk about Stand Up for Great Lakes. It's a fantastic project right after this on My Michigan Television.
We are connected to our Lake Huron shoreline, all 93 miles of it. Hidden bays and marinas dot our shores. Points of entry to our world. Open waters and waves, alive with people at play. Inspiration floats on sparkling waves. We are in awe of its strength and in love with its allure. We nurture it, play in it, savor it. Huron County Waters.
Welcome to Mackinac Island.
We were just named the #1 island destination in the continental U.S. by Travel and Leisure magazine.
We are proud of our little slice of paradise.
And hope we have a chance to visit soon.
So hop on in and treat yourself
to fascinating history,
delicious island traditions,
and an unforgettable nightlife.
We look forward to seeing you soon on Mackinac Island.
Looking for the perfect weekend getaway? Love Lansing like a local. And we promise, you'll love Lansing just as much as we do.
Welcome back to My Michigan Television. I'm Steve Lehto. We're talking about Stand Up for Great Lakes. It's a project where 3 guys are paddleboarding, and they're going to cross each of the Great Lakes at one point or another. They've got 4 of them under their belt so far. The 5th is coming up this summer, sometime probably around the 2nd week of June. They're going to paddleboard across Lake Ontario. And there are some people out there right now who are going, well, you're paddleboarding. It's not like you're swimming. No, trust me. When you're paddleboarding those distances on Great Lakes, it is a challenge. 3 guys, Jeff Guy, Joe Lorenz, and Quinn Morris are the 3 paddleboarders. And right now we're joined by Jeff Guy, one of the paddleboarders, and Corey Adkins, who's documenting all of this so that everyone can see it. But also, this is raising money for the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research, as well as raising awareness. And Corey, can you tell us a little bit about what the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research does?
Well, they help research and come up with solutions for problems around the Great Lakes. One of the biggest problems right now is plastics, microplastics that, you know, if they get into the water, let's say a plastic bottle breaks down, gets into the water, breaks down, a fish eats it, then we catch the fish, and then it becomes a part of us, you know, into our bodies. So that's one of the things. They're also, they pay attention to land erosion, and they research and help solve problems around all of our Great Lakes. And they're a really great group to be a part of. I know Jeff could probably speak better to them than I, but I did get to go out with their we call them Sigler, because Cooperative for Institute Great Lakes. I did get to go out with them in an alga bloom on Lake Erie as we were doing the Lake Erie paddle, and it is just what's happening there is choking off fish, is choking off oxygen to the bottom of the lakes, and it's depleting our lakes. So what they're doing is very important work. But Jeff can probably speak a little better than I about that.
Okay.
I think you covered it pretty well, Corey. So I was just at a event last week. So there was a guy named Dan Egan that wrote a book, The Life and Death of the Great Lakes. And he's now written a new book, and a large chunk of it is totally dedicated to these algal blooms. And it's about phosphates and phosphorus, but that's become a huge problem. I mean, an algal bloom shut down the whole water supply for the city of Toledo, Ohio, about 8 years ago. And these algal blooms are just starting to become more and more prevalent. They even had one on Lake Superior, which is crazy with how cold and sterile that lake is. So there's probably a few different reasons why they're becoming more prevalent, but the main one is the agricultural runoff and the phosphates that are getting into the lake.
Yeah, I know I've heard about, for instance, the people who get their lawns sprayed for weeds. You think nothing of it, but they come out and they spray this stuff on your lawn and it kills your dandelions, as if your dandelions are the worst thing on earth. But if that happens near a river, that stuff runs off into the river is flowing into the lakes. And next thing you know, there's also all these chemicals, but also a lot of fertilizer that gets run off into the water. And of course, fertilizer is great for plants, such as algae. It's a plant. Who'd have thought, And the weird thing about this is the Great Lakes have obviously been around since long before we were here. But European descendants discovered them around the 1600s, like, Etienne Brulé stumbles upon Lake Superior up by the Sioux, right? But since that time, it seems that every few years there's something new that comes along and challenges it. I mean, remember the zebra mussels? That was a big deal. Algae blooms, another big deal. I believe there's been other invasive species that have been introduced through ballast off of, ocean-going freighters and so on. And so it does remind us that it's something we have to be vigilant about constantly. We like to think that, scientists will take care of us or our politicians will protect us, when in reality, it's an ongoing battle. And so it's people like the Cooperative Institute that are at the front edge of this, studying what these problems are, what causes them, what we can possibly do about them. But of course, they need funding, and that's one of the things that you guys are raising money for.
Yeah, that's right. One thing I would add too, so you talked about zebra mussels, and they're certainly a problem, but there's another species called quagga mussels. So zebra mussels can only live up to like 100 feet deep of water. Quagga mussels can live much deeper. And so if you were to take a camera down to the bottom of Lake Michigan, you would just see it carpeted with quagga mussels. And I think that's become a even bigger problem than the zebra mussels. But really not sure what we can do about it since they're already in. But the main thing is to try to keep other invasive species out before they become a problem.
Well, yeah, I know that, for instance, they're struggling to keep the Asian carp out. And the question is whether they get in or not, what'll happen if they get in. But if you think about it, years ago, they wouldn't have spotted that till it was too late. At the very least, they spotted this before they got in. Maybe they can keep them out. I don't know.
I hope so. That's one thing that is very important to us, because once they do get in, I don't know how you would get them out. It seems like it would just, it would just snowball. And that's why we're very focused on those type of issues. the environmental issues are also important, but, you know, if there were, like, if there's an oil spill or something like that, it's bad, but it can be cleaned up. It can be, we can move past it, but some of these things like the Asian carp would be irreversible.
Right. Now, Corey is documenting all of this, and I know that you've already created some documentaries about some of these trips. Where can people find those documentaries?
Some on YouTube, and some on, and some of them on a platform called viewit.com. And there's a section called Crossing the Great Lakes, and you can see most of them there.
Okay, and I know that people
all
can
except for
obviously
one.
go to the Facebook page for Stand Up Great Lakes and find Stand Up for Great Lakes on Facebook, and then a lot of that information will be there as well, right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, after this interview, we can repost all those links. I'll do that.
Okay, good. So yeah, this is cool. And one of the things about the Great Lakes is they're very scenic. they're fun to look at, you know. So I've seen some of the footage that you guys have shot. It's stellar. And you know, for somebody who works in an office, or if you work at a home office, then you're not near the Great Lakes. To me, it's always fun just to take a break and look at the lakes, even if it's raining or, you know, frozen rain or sleet, because we're not getting cold. You are.
That's true. Well, one of the first time I did go out on the Lake Huron with these guys, our safety captain, his name is Ryan Matuzak. We had a safety meeting before we all went, and he was like, "It's warm now, but it's going to be cold as hell later. So you're going to be as cold as the temperature of the lake." So the people on the safety boats, he's like, bring coats, bring winter gear. Even though it's 70 degrees in the day, it's going to be 38 degrees at night. So when Jeff, Quinn, and Joe go out there, they're wearing full wetsuits to keep them warm at night, because they don't touch the safety boats. That's one of the things. The safety boats are out there for just in case. So when they're out there, there's Joe right there. That's one of his wetsuits when it was raining like crazy. That's Quinn. Those are their survival gear. And right there, Jeff is cold as heck because he actually just fell in. Was that the point, Jeff? When it was right after you caught the fish.
Yeah.
He actually had a fish jump on his board during one of these.
Yeah,
So,
I was playing,
wow.
I was
There it is.
playing right after that, playing around with that fish. It was kind of slimy, and you could see I only had my suit halfway on, and I went in and got soaking wet, and that was devastating because I was cold like a long part of that trip.
That's the drawback of wearing a suit like that. When it's not zipped up all the way, you get water inside and game over.
Yeah, and we call Jeff the very stoic member of the group. Ryan and I and our EMT Mike, he's stoic because he never shows any emotion. So we didn't really know he was that cold. He kind of held that from us through most of that trip on Lake Huron. But Jeff is a tough guy.
So what we're looking forward to right now is the final leg of the trip. You guys have covered 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. The 5th Great Lake is Lake Ontario. And in June, you guys will be doing roughly a 65-mile round trip. It's going to take you 24 hours, but across Lake Ontario and back. Corey will document it, and you can follow along at Stand Up for Great Lakes. They're raising money. They're raising awareness. It's a great cause. It sounds like a lot of fun, but I've never done stand-up paddleboarding. I will admit, I tried surfing when I was in California, and I never quite managed to stand up, so I can't imagine doing it and paddling for any length of time. So I just don't have it in me, but I salute you guys for doing it. So is there anything else you'd like to throw in your, Corey or Jeff?
I think you could do it, Steve. I think, my mother does it and paddles like all the time. So I think you could do it. Maybe start practice out on your knees or something and and definitely start it going into the wind. Don't go downwind first, because then you might not be able to come back. So
Gotcha.
And
Hey, Corey,
I've never stand
Corey,
up.
you'll be documenting this, right?
Yep. And I've never stand-up paddleboarded either. I just enjoy documenting these adventures and acts of human endurance. And you know, if anybody wants to support the cause, just go to standupforgreatlakes.com and help us on our journey. When I say our, I mean there.
Okay. Well, like I said, people in Michigan, we love our Great Lakes, and we like to think of them as our Great Lakes. I understand that other people around the country get to use them too, but we are, with a special relationship to them, we also have a duty to protect them. We don't just play in them, but we also have to protect them. So part of that's education, part of that's awareness. And so the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research does a lot of that work, but we're raising money and raising awareness with this Stand Up for Great Lakes project. Congratulations, you guys, on how far you've come. And Godspeed in June. And maybe we can have you back on afterwards. We can talk about a wrap up of the entire project. How's that sound?
sounds great. Thank you. Thank you again for giving us a chance to come on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Nice seeing you again. And we'll talk soon. And we'll be back right after this on My Michigan Television.
We are connected to our Lake Huron shoreline, all 93 miles of it. Hidden bays and marinas dot our shores. Points of entry to our world. Open waters and waves, alive with people at play. Inspiration floats on sparkling waves. We are in awe of its strength and in love with its allure. We nurture it, play in it, savor it. Huron County Waters.
Pure is what you make of it. It's how the hustle of the cities can change the course of history. It's the beauty of the things we create on a canvas, on a plate, or stretched high above the sidewalk. It's a patch of green or a stretch of blue, right in the heart of downtown. It's the buzz of it all, or if you prefer, it's tuning it all out. Clear your schedule and pursue your pure in Pure, Michigan.
Don't miss out! Download the My Michigan TV mobile app to stay up to date with all of our programming.
Welcome back to My Michigan Television. I'm Steve Lehto. Don't forget, Stand Up for Great Lakes. Check them out on Facebook. And from there, you can see all the documentaries, all the details of the stories and things they've already done, and the upcoming trip in June across Lake Ontario on paddleboards, stand-up paddleboards. I couldn't do it. Meanwhile, you know that we've lost power now in the state of Michigan on several occasions, and some areas have been hit more often than others. It's one thing to lose power once every couple of years, but to lose it 2 or 3 times in the same year, that could be frustrating. So residents and activists have been upset by power outages, and they gathered at Westland Town Hall, where they vented about this. Mark Hicks from the Detroit News covered the story. When asked how many in the audience had lost electricity during recent storms, most of the nearly 100 people at the town hall Monday raised their hands. Art Rays, the executive director of the advocacy group We the People, asked how many had been in the dark more than once over multiple days. And the number who raised their hands was still nearly half of the people in the room. He said, this isn't normal. This is not okay. More than 700,000 DTE customers, or about 1/3 of its customers in Southeast Michigan, along with roughly 250,000 consumers' energy customers, were without power after the ice storm in February downed 11,000 power lines. That was event number one. Other storms followed. So Ray's group, the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, and a U.S. representative hosted the town hall to discuss the number of power outages that resulted from these storms. Utility companies, the rep said, provide some of the most critical services, so we've got to treat it that way. Frustration over responses by DTE Energy and Consumers Energy, the state's largest power suppliers, have grown in recent years after weather-related outages. But criticism has spiked in the last month amid 3 storms that caused widespread power outages. Some residents were in the dark nearly a week, forcing them into hotels or reliance on generators. Some customers said it was the longest they'd been without electricity. Others stayed in the cold because they had no place else to go. Thousands of outages were also reported after storms on February 27th and March 3rd. Both of those knocked down more power lines. A Westland councilwoman described how families and businesses lost food and goods when their power was out for long periods. We're very angry, she said. DTE and consumers officials have described the storms as significant, with damaged tree branches snapping under heavy snow and ice that fell on power lines and equipment. They said thousands of workers labored around the clock for days to restore power, and they did. But I do wonder about areas that lost power over and over again. DTE's president and CEO said such strong weather events appear to be the new normal. We need to continue to invest in our system and harden our system so we can deal with this new normal of the stronger weather patterns that continue to hit Michigan. Residents also criticized what they called the small amount of compensation available for lengthy outages. DTE has said it would issue automatic credits of $35 if a resident lost power for more than 96 hours. So if you were without power for, 3 or 4 days, they're going to give you $35. There you go, $35. At that point, it's not even significant. I mean, it's like an insult. The Michigan Public Service Commission last March approved changes to state rules that would require all regulated utilities to increase their power outage credits from $25 to $35, plus $35 extra for additional days past a certain benchmark. But those rule changes aren't in effect yet and are still waiting approval from the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, the commission told the Detroit News. Under Michigan's current outage credit requirements, residents who lose power in normal conditions, such as a small storm or a malfunction, can receive a $25 outage credit on their monthly bill if they're out of power for more than 16 hours. But the resident has to request the credit. I don't think most people know those credits exist. Rays called $35 a slap in the face to residents who spent hundreds of dollars restocking their pantries or staying in hotels. Among them was Jarvis Bird, a resident of Redford Township, who uses a motorized scooter. He lost power for nearly 5 days and was forced to head to a hotel in Brighton, which was the only place available. He said he's not optimistic that he and other residents will be heard, but hopes officials plan to explore ways to rely on other power sources, such as solar panels. He said, I think we need to decentralize the power grid. Harriet Kamek of Detroit did not lose power during the storms, but said DTE was slow to fix a downed wire at her home. Instead of being a 24-hour emergency, it became a 7-day emergency. This is supposed to be the richest nation in the world, yet the residents are treated like they don't matter. The policy director at We the People cited her group's research showing that consumers in DTE were among the least reliable in the country, with outages becoming too frequent at the same time that residents are paying higher energy bills. We don't have reliable service, she said. DTE officials did not immediately respond to a request for comment Monday night. Meanwhile, the director of external relations at Consumers said the company understands the frustration, and this strengthens our resolve to do better. Consumers Energy is carrying out our 5-year, $5 billion to strengthen our electric grid, reduce customer outages. I guess it's a $5 billion plan. In 2022, we saw nearly 20% fewer customer outages compared to 21 after we made significant upgrades to the electric grid and completed more than 2,000 electric projects as part of the plan. We are open to ideas from the Michigan Public Service Commission, policymakers, and others who share our commitment to delivering world-class performance to our customers. Utility officials attributed reliability improvements last year compared to 21 to less severe weather, as well as the equipment upgrades, increased tree trimming, and vegetation management. Michigan historically is ranked high among U.S. states in terms of electric power interruptions and how long it takes utilities to restore service. The state is also at a disadvantage because weather can be more severe on land surrounded by lakes. Michigan also has numerous trees which interfere with wires. Of the state's 37 million acres, nearly 20 million acres are forested, according to the DNR. Monday's event comes ahead of other events tied to the outages. State rep from Detroit announced the House Energy, Communication, and Technology Committee that she chairs is scheduled to hear testimony Wednesday from power company leaders and the head of the Michigan Public Service Commission. The commission also scheduled 2 in-person town halls in areas hard hit by the storm. One is from noon to 2:30 at the American One Credit Union Event Center in Jackson on March 20th. Another is from 5:30 till 8 the same day at Fordson High School in Dearborn. The next day, the commission has scheduled a virtual town hall live streamed over Microsoft Teams from 6 till 8 p.m. On Monday, State Senator Sean McCann of Kalamazoo announced the Senate Energy and Environment Committee he chairs has scheduled a hearing on March 23rd on the storm-related power outages. Hearing will take place in rooms 402 and 403 of the Michigan Capitol from 8:30 in the morning until 9:50. Representatives of the Michigan Public Service Commission, DTE Energy, and consumers have been invited to participate. As chair of the Michigan Senate Energy and Environment Committee, it is critical to me and the members to hear from the Michigan Public Service Commission, DTE Energy, and consumers about their responses to the recent ice storms and related power outages, he said. The devastating and prolonged loss of power because of these storms and the so many Michigan residents impacted, they deserve answers and action. So a lot of talking, we'll see what happens. I can tell you that my only experience lately with dealing with them was when a tree fell on my property and tore down a power line that runs into a building on my property. And the weird part is the line was on the ground and it was live. It was not broken in the sense that, I mean, there was power going through it. And I know that because I could go into the building and turn the lights on and off. And so I called consumers and said, hey, I've got a downed power line on my property. They said, well, is it in the road? I said, no, it's in my yard. They said, well, stay away from it. I said, how long will it be till you get out here? And they said, well, we have to prioritize these things. Now, I always thought live lines laying on the ground were something that were prioritized. Apparently not highly. And so it was several days before they came out and did anything about it. But the whole time I've got this live line laying on the ground. Now, I don't know if it was dangerous to go over and, play with it. I avoided it, but like I said, I always assumed that when you say I've got a live power line on the ground that they'd come running. But apparently there were worse problems elsewhere. Because like I said, it took a couple days to get to me. Now, one quick note while we're talking about trees and whatnot. Beavers are making a comeback in Southeast Michigan. And now there's a lot of beavers up north. And there were beavers all over this land a long time ago. But for the last 100 years or so, you wouldn't think of a lot of beavers being like, say, Wayne County or Oakland County, but they're making a comeback. Marina Johnson writes to the Free Press that over the past 10 years, beaver populations have returned to Southeast Michigan in unusual places such as Belle Isle, Stony Island, the Connor Creek Power Plant, and also places up and down the Detroit River. When settlers moved into Metro Detroit, beaver trapping for the fur trade was plentiful, and that eliminated much of the population. In fact, the species was almost wiped out due to overhunting 300 years ago. But it was that and also habitat loss that pushed beavers out of this area and were last reported in 1877 down here. Now, there are beavers in the UP, there's beavers up north. I've seen many, many beavers in Michigan. They're not extinct. It's just it's it's what you call extirpated, meaning they've been pushed out of an area. They're still around, just not around here. Beavers were first reported back in the area in 2008, according to Friends of the Rouge, referring to the river. For the first time in over 100 years, beavers were working on trees and building dams near the Connors Creek power plant. Since then, beaver sightings in the Detroit and Rouge rivers aren't uncommon and continue to increase. And the Rouge River used to be badly polluted. I assume it's not something you'd want to drink out of right about now, but it's not as polluted as it used to be. According to Robert Burns, Detroit River Keeper with the Friends of Detroit River Group, populations are increasing because areas are more habitable to the species. We've noticed in the last 10 to 15 years, there are more beavers starting to move to the area. From a habitat perspective and an indicator perspective, it shows that things are changing in the river that are conducive for various populations to start to reform and increase. He said beavers typically look for habitats that are secluded and accessible to water and food sources year-round, making spots along the Detroit River a now suitable home. Meanwhile, the Department of Natural Resources wildlife biologists for Wayne, Monroe, and Lenawee counties said they use various reports to estimate current beaver populations. We don't have population numbers exactly, but we have trapping survey reports, and those combined with sighting reports and nuisance reports, we can get a good picture of a healthy population that is slowly increasing. And by nuisance, beavers do chew on trees. They'll often chop down trees in the process. Now, if they're building a dam and they use it for that purpose, more power to them. But I've also seen it when they come up on land, they chew on a tree and they leave. And they just leave a half chopped down tree or one that falls over, but they might not care so much about that because, you know, they're beavers. Friend of mine lives kind of towards the middle of the state up here. And she's got some trail cams she set up and they catch beavers chopping down trees near the edge of a lake she lives on. So Fox 2 said numbers increased in the 3 counties from 06 to 2020. So the DNR has beavers categorized as nuisance wildlife due to damage they cause in urban industrialized areas. They often chew on trees and their dams cause flooding and problems for homeowners. The DNR does offer trapping services and permits for those impacted in certain areas. But they said the DNR is given a difficult hand because they want beavers around, just not at the expense of a homeowner's property. So beaver in residential areas typically lead to problems. It's their nature to back up and flood a waterway to create a pond. Up north, around the country, they can do that. It doesn't impact anybody. Most people don't want that happening on their property. Burns said the return of beavers is a matter of perspective as they can cause significant damage. However, the return shows improvements in terms of pollution, environment, and climate. As we see more of them, it just tells us that things are getting better. The environment is conducive for both habitats and food sources for them to start repopulating. You think about before European descendants got to this area, the entire state was forested and running amok with all kinds of animals that we don't see now on a daily basis, right? And so some of those things are coming back in and some of them are problems. Coyotes, for instance, are coming into some urban areas. And of course, they are a danger to cats and dogs. And of course, there's a lot of animals around that you don't notice unless you're looking for them or unless you keep really odd hours, but like raccoons and foxes. And of course, rabbits are everywhere. And I've actually picked up on one of my security cameras, a coyote walking around my backyard. Now, I don't have anything in my backyard that is is threatened by the coyote. Unless, of course, a roadrunner comes by, in which case all bets are off. But for the time being, you haven't seen that happen. But you think about that and keep in mind that they were here before we were, okay? So if a beaver sets up camp over here, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. But I do understand I don't want him chopping down on my trees just because he needs something to nibble on. And I can understand why that would frustrate a homeowner. So that, of course, would then be a problem. But beavers are making a comeback, especially up and down the Detroit River corridor and the Rouge River corridor, which means that they are probably right now clearing some land on Belle Isle. But It's now a state park, so the DNR can take a look at that. Meanwhile, there was a movie called Catch Me If You Can that came out a few years ago. I find it very annoying because a lot of people think the movie was a true story, and it wasn't. And I've mentioned this before, but I got some more information on this. We'll be talking about that right after this on My Michigan Television.
A message from Detroit to everybody. The adventurers, the explorers, the nomads, and the foodies, the art enthusiasts, and the music lovers. When you're ready to come, Detroit is ready to go. From shopping and museums to restaurants, parks, and more, Motown has way too much to do in just a single day. When the time is right, all this is waiting for you in Detroit. Begin planning your next trip at visitdetroit.com.
My Michigan TV is streaming everywhere on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, and more smart TV apps. My Michigan TV is on your phone too. Take us with you wherever you go. Just search for My Michigan TV on your favorite app store or visit mymitv.com. All Michigan, streaming everywhere. My Michigan TV.
Whenever I mention how difficult the bar exam was, someone invariably says, Steve, Frank Abagnale passed it. He didn't go to law school. And of course, the problem is that Frank Abagnale did not pass the bar exam. Frank Abagnale is the guy who was the subject of a movie called Catch Me If You Can, which presented his life story as if it was true. But the problem is that Frank Abagnale is a con man. And the real con was that his entire life story as presented in that movie was not true. He was never an attorney. He was never a doctor. He was never a college professor. All of those claims have been debunked. But Steven Spielberg apparently liked the story enough to say, well, it may not be true, but it's entertaining. And so they made a movie about it. And now people think it's a true story, and it's not. And so I was so happy to see the article in today's New York Post called Catch Me If You Can, Con Man Frank Abagnale Jr. lied about his lifetime of lies, sources claim. Abby Ellen wrote this, and she says that she wrote a book about liars in general called Duped. And when the Times of London reviewed the book, a photo from the movie was displayed. And of course, that movie is allegedly about Frank Abagnale. Frank Abagnale emailed her and complained that it bothered him that every day someone writes an article about a bank robbery, a forgery, or a con artist, they refer to me. And then he said, the crime I committed was writing bad checks. I was 16 at the time. I served 5 years in prison and the U.S. federal prison system. In 1974, after serving 4 years, the government took me out of prison to work for the FBI. I have done so now for more than 43 years. That's not true, though, by the way. Just letting you know that. He added that he repaid all of his debts. But of course, don't forget that he used to appear on television all the time, claiming that he'd run all these scams and all these cons. He was on the television show To Tell the Truth. He was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson a bunch of times. And he also traveled the country speaking. And he would speak to organizations allegedly as you can learn from me how not to get ripped off. And then he'd get up on stage and just tell stories that were not true at all. But they were funny, but they were not true. So according to both Abagnale himself and his own autobiography, in the mid-1960s and early 70s, he impersonated a Pan Am pilot flying some 3 million miles to 82 countries for free. He claimed to have posed as a doctor in Georgia, a sociology professor in Utah, and a lawyer in Louisiana. All of those have been debunked. Those things never happened. He made them up. By the way, you'll even notice it in the movie, if you saw it. Steven Spielberg didn't include the college professor part because it was one thing for him to pretend to be a doctor and a lawyer and a college professor? Like, okay, let's get rid of one of those because it's starting to get crazy here. During the period, he allegedly cashed 17,000 bogus checks, totaling to $2.5 million. That's the legend, though. So the woman who writes the article says she asked Abagnale the question, why does he object then to being associated with deception? And then she said that she forgot about it, but then she was contacted by a man named Jim Keith. In 1981, Keith was then manager of security at a J.C. Penney in St. Louis. He heard Abagnale speak at an area high school, and he and a local detective were in the audience and didn't think this guy's story made sense. So they started researching him. So the man and his daughter told the Post, like a dog with a bone, is determined to show this guy was a fraud, and not a fraud who cashed bad checks like he said, but a fraud in all the stories he was claiming about the things he said. So accusations that Abagnale had fabricated his life story had been swirling for years, including an expose in the San Francisco Chronicle in 1978 and the Daily Oklahoman soon after. And what happened was Abagnale had appeared on television and made all these claims, and newspapers came out and debunked them. But people love a good story, whether or not it's true. So, of course, this is long before the internet. So the man I mentioned earlier teamed up with a professor, and they began doing an investigation. And they then sent an 87-page file of clippings and documents and letters, along with correspondence from one of the investigators. And it turns out that a vast majority of what Abagnale was saying was not true. Now, some of it was true. He did forge some checks, and he masqueraded as a pilot, but then the rest of his not-so-humble brags were inaccurate, misleading, exaggerated, or totally false, says one of these investigators. In fact, Mark Zinder, who's Abagnale's former speaking agent, said he was a two-bit criminal. I'm embarrassed I ever associated with him. Abagnale never pretended to be a professor or a physician or a lawyer. Those things did not happen. And the doctor and the lawyer are two of the major parts of that movie. They never happened. He was also never a consultant to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. And by the way, he never says he was employed by the FBI. He says, I worked with them. I think he worked with them when he got arrested. I think that's what he considers that. So Abagnale did not steal money from a deposit drop at Boston's Logan Airport, which he said in his book, but it was not in the movie, I don't think. And his Pan Am antics were seriously embellished. So all of this has been debunked. And by the way, almost everything he did, he says happened in that little 5-year period between 16 years and 21 years of age. But of course, he claims he cashed 17,000 checks. Okay. So he was out of jail during those 5 years, only 14 months. He would have been writing 40 checks a day, every single day to make that work. So in November of 70, the 21-year-old was picked up in Georgia after cashing 10 fake checks worth a grand total of $1,400. He was sent to a federal penitentiary and sentenced to 12 years. He claims that the feds sprung him so he could work with the FBI, but there is no evidence to support this claim, and the FBI won't comment. There's also no proof that the Bureau set up a task force just to get him. In fact, he's arrested again in 74 for stealing art and photography equipment from a Texas summer camp at the age of 26. So there have been entire books written on this, articles written on this. Please don't think that movie's true. I know somebody who asked Steven Spielberg about it. He said, hey, it was a good story. Never said it was true. It was a good story. So it drives me crazy, but no, Frank Abagnale did not take the bar exam, didn't pose as a doctor, never posed as a professor. All nonsense. I'm going to wrap up for today. I will see you tomorrow right here on My Michigan Television, 11 o'clock until noon. Until then, you behave yourself. Bye-bye.
My Michigan TV is streaming everywhere on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, and more smart TV apps. My Michigan TV is on your phone, too. Take us with you wherever you go. Just search for My Michigan TV on your favorite app store or visit mymitv.com. All Michigan, streaming everywhere. My Michigan TV.